Hello and welcome to The Print. Today we are discussing the new controversy which has broken out after the back series GDP data was revised yesterday. The Niti Aayog chief Dr. Rajiv Kumar held a press conference and announced the new figures. It obviously indicates that growth rate during the UPA government had been slower. What we saw in the last GDP back series GDP data, the growth rate under economist Sudipto Mandal, who had done the calculation, showed UPA growth rate was higher than the NDA growth rate. We have about 15-20 minutes with us. Please do send in your questions. We'll be happy to take them. Before we get into the questions, let me just explain what the controversy is all about. Now, in July, the back series GDP data had been released by the CSO, the Central Statistics Office. It showed that the growth rate, the economic growth rate during the UPA era was much higher than the NDA regime in the last 4 years. Naturally, this did not go down very well with the present government, and they did not make it an official document. They said there was nothing official about it, and there could have been some miscalculations, some misinformation in calculating the GDP data. It was not put up as an official figure, as I told you, and what had been done was the base year based on which the GDP calculations had been done. It was changed from 2004 and 5 to 2011 and 12 for the new back series GDP data. Now, the first set of data showed that in the 10 years of UPA government, the growth rate was about over 8% actually, while it was just about 7.3 under the BJP government, under the Narendra Modi-led BJP government. Now, there have been political ramifications. The Congress obviously said that the UPA era, the growth rate, the political reforms, the economic reforms were much better, and the things haven't really moved that well under present government. But after yesterday, we see that the growth rate during the UPA government has come down to 6.8%, while the NDA government, while in the last 4 years the growth rate has been 7.3%. Now, this obviously has, given a fresh round of controversy. Many have questioned the GDP data. People are confused with the two sets of data. They do not know which one to believe, which obviously does not throw a very good light on the Indian economy as such. There have been questions on the GDP data, on data collation, on data formulation by the Indian authorities, by the CSO. There is also a credibility factor which has been sort of attached with the CSO now. The other thing, like many have questioned, is why should the Niti Aayog hold a press conference to announce GDP growth or GDP data? We have seen Finance Minister Arun Jaitley coming up with a statement in the morning. He said CSO was absolutely free, it was autonomous, and not autonomous in the sense, it is under the government, but the Finance Ministry has no role to play in collation of the data. We have a few questions coming in already. We have a question: does this essentially mean that the NDA government is tampering with the UPA growth figures, particularly before the elections? Now, honestly, we do not know whether it can be called tampering. Now, what happens is, as we go ahead, as the economy progresses, there are many more data points which we start getting. There are many more data points which are fresh, and some data points also get defunct and obsolete. So there is a need, there is a necessity to upgrade and to constantly keep changing with the changing times. But at the same time, what does raise questions, what does come into question is the timing of this data and the way it was done. In July, when the data came out, the new series, the back series, and they said that the government came out and said that these are not the official figures, and they said that we need to hold on to see what the final figures are. And just in about a few months' time, we see there's a new set of data which says that the growth rate, the economic growth rate during the UPA time was much lower than what was projected in the month of July. The other question that we have is GDP has always been one of the most manipulated measures for economic growth. What other measures can we see to compare the economic growth under UPA and NDA through the years? Now that's an interesting question. Now GDP growth rate is, this data point is just one of the many data points that we have which can actually which determines whether the economy did well or it did not do well. There are other data points like bank credit, what has been the bank credit, what kind of investments we have had, what has been the rural growth, whether there has been any agrarian crisis, whether the rural sector, which is a very, very critical sector for the Indian economy, how has that sector done? So all these put together, and of course employment generation is another very critical factor to which gives us some sort of a sense on the economy and the growth of the economy. So definitely GDP data, the growth rate, the economic data, the GDP growth rate is one thing, but at the same time we need to keep in mind how the bank credit rolled out, how whether there was appetite for credit. So these are other factors which go on to determine how the economy has been doing. Now there's another question from Rajgopal. What kind of political consequences will it have? What impact will it have on the credit rating of India? Now this obviously, like many have said, that there was a necessity, it was needed to sort of change the method, the calculation method of the GDP data formulation. But at the same time, the way it was done, the way it was carried out, the exercise, it does not really throw a very good light. Though it may have been necessary, it may have been important. But the timing has been questioned. It has been done just a few months before the elections. And whether or not it will fetch votes for the NDA government or for the UPA is difficult to say. But yes, one thing is for sure, like when we saw the global meltdown in 2008-9, India stood tall. India was not really impacted by the global slowdown, and this is one of the things which all Indians have been taking pride about, that we were sort of not impacted by the global meltdown. Now to change the GDP data and to say, actually to sort of highlight that perhaps we did not do as well as it was being projected to be, I don't think that goes down too well with any of us. The other thing is whether it will impact the credit rating of India. It can actually, because it actually starts throwing questions on data mining, which has always been in question, because we've seen not just this government but the previous government as well trying to sort of come up with its own data points, with its own formula, with its own method. So this does have a sort of a bearing on the overall impression that probably India will sort of fetch amongst investors, because it's very important to give out very clear data, very clear figures to investors, to other stakeholders, and this does it is a cause for worry, because we are actually trying to say that the earlier data was all garbled and we need to change that, and in a span of just a few months it does not throw a very good light. And let me here point it out to you that in January 2015 the present government had sort of decided to come up with the back series GDP data to keep in line with the new data points, to take into account the new data points that were available with us. And the back series GDP data which we saw in July was also brought out by a committee which was appointed during the time of the NDA. So it just does not gel very well with the entire phenomenon of changing the data in such a short span. We have another question. in case the new government comes, will there be another change? Now, well, typically GDP data or back series GDP data is very, very sacrosanct, and we do not keep changing data as such. But yes, I mean, when we, like yesterday we saw the GDP data or the back series GDP data, the data points have been changed, the figures have been changed. So nobody can say if there is a change in the government, if the next government comes, if it's some other dispensation, there could be a change. Now that is absolutely left to the other government. Whether there is a change in the government or not, that depends on them really. The other thing is what may irk a lot of Indians is in 2011-12 India did manage, as per the old GDP, the back series GDP data that was released in July, we did manage to clock a growth rate of over 10%, a double-digit growth. Now that has been slashed, that has been brought down to 8.5, which actually shows that there has been no double-digit growth during that time. Now this obviously has led to fresh controversy. The Congress, the opposition party, the other opposition parties, and many others have questioned the need to have brought in this kind of new data, and why should the Niti Aayog be involved in releasing the new set of data. So there we are, and we have to wait and watch for what the next steps would be from the government, from the opposition. From now, we'll have to see what Jaitley says, what Dr. Rajiv Kumar says, and I'm sure the opposition is not going to take it very easy. We have seen the former finance minister, Mr. Chidambaram, has already lashed out at the government. It's up to the government and the opposition to take it forward now. This is Mahua Venkatesh for The Print.